Well, by now it is a familiar refrain. Canada is failing to meet its NATO commitment, failing to invest 2% of GDP into defense, failing to have a plan to get there before the end of this decade. U.S. politicians have noted it. The U.S. ambassador to Canada has noted it. And on Thursday, the NATO Secretary General called it out indirectly.
18 out of 32 allies are spending 2% of GDP on defense, but I expect that number to increase by the summit in July. We will, in not so many weeks, we will publish new updated numbers. And since February, Sweden has joined the alliance. Sweden is already spending 2%, so then we are 19. Then Norway has announced finally that they will spend 2% of GDP on defense. And also some other allies are very close. So I really hope that by the summit in July we will have even better numbers to present.
And again, that was the NATO Secretary General. Well, for more on the subject, we're now joined by Canada's ambassador to the United States, Kirsten Hillman. Ambassador Hillman, thank you for being here this evening.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
So Jens Stoltenberg, of course, we just heard from him. He's hoping to have better news this summer from NATO countries still not meeting the 2% commitment. We heard from a number of U.S. senators last week calling on Canada to do better. I'm wondering, in your position, how loudly are you hearing this chorus? Is it being raised with you more often these days?
So here's what I would say to that. We have had Minister Blair here in town in Washington a couple of weeks ago. He came in to meet with the Pentagon, meet with the Hill, meet with others around town to talk about the defense policy, our North Strong and Free. And the universal reaction in all of that meetings was a recognition and appreciation for the focus of that policy. So for those who aren't following this as closely, the policy is focused on the Arctic, on protecting and defending and having the resources necessary to protect the Arctic. And that is a priority for the Americans. NORAD modernization, Arctic protection, northern protection. And the second big focus of the policy is the Indo-Pacific. Again, a huge priority for the Americans. So what we heard time and time again is that they really appreciate the focus, the prioritization. They know sort of where Canada is putting its attention and its money and its efforts, and that's highly useful for our American allies. Now, it's the other thing that I would say is on the question of expenditure levels. There is a recognition first that Canada has made important steps forward. So 27% increase in spending this year over last, and more than a doubling in the last decade. It's an upward trajectory. Even the Secretary General of NATO has recognized how it's an important upward trajectory. But our American friends will say that's great. But we, as the letter shows, we want to know how much, when you will go further and when you will achieve this 2% goal.
Yeah. Well, does that suggest, though, that patience is wearing thin? Because, the senator's letter is one thing, but we also heard from the U.S. ambassador to Canada. Over the weekend, he warned that Canada is essentially now the outlier for not having a plan to meet the commitment in NATO. Is patience wearing thin with Canada?
That's not how I experience it. Really, what I find here is, Americans want to be clear with respect to their expectations, and they are being clear with respect to their expectations. But we're being clear back with respect to our commitment, our priorities, our movement forward. This represents an awful lot of expenditures, and it doesn't happen overnight. But we do have a path forward through this new plan. And the plan also highlights further expenditures that Canada is planning to make in submarines and other areas, which gets us, I think, where we need to go. So I would say that Americans are always going to be very clear when it comes to national defense. It is a very strong priority for our American allies. And we can expect them to always be calling on all of their allies, including us, to make the contributions that they feel are appropriate and necessary.
Okay, but to pick up in your terminology there, amongst the most to be clear has been Donald Trump, and he has been critical when he was in the White House with what he described at the time as delinquent countries when it comes to not meeting NATO commitments. And I know that there is a push right now to remind Americans about the importance of the Canada-U.S. relationship, but will Canada's failure to meet the 2% or even have a published plan to get there become a potential irritant if, in fact, Donald Trump is reelected in November?
My experience with Americans, including Republicans, is they want to be able to have an open and honest exchange. And they want to be able to know what they can count on Canada for. And I think in that regard, as I say, this policy is very, very well received here, because what is the specific asset that Canada can bring to the table? It relates to our geography. It relates to our particular expertise in the north. It relates to, years and years of work up there, which is something that other allies, don't bring within our specific geography. So I think it should not be underestimated. And I think that the fact that we have aligned priorities with the Americans, whether they're Republican or Democrat, for some of the threats that are being faced in the North and in the Indo-Pacific is very important. And I think that is something that we will take to the next White House, whether it be a Biden or a Trump White House, and it will be well received there. Does it mean that they won't continue to, ask us questions and maybe at times push us on spending? No, I don't think it will. But it's also exists in the context of everything that we have done in recent years and how much we've ramped up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mentioned Donald Trump there, and let me pick up on that point now, because on the matter of trade, the last time Donald Trump was in the White House, it did create a lot of economic uncertainty for Canada, tariffs on aluminum and steel, trade disputes over dairy and the auto industry. The Prime Minister was just in Philadelphia this month. I'm wondering, does all this legwork actually prevent future problems? Because it is being done right now while a Democrat, Joe Biden, is president.
So what we're working on, and Canada, when we're in the United States, we're reaching out to allies all the time. It's sort of the basic work of a diplomatic network. But you're quite right to say that we are approaching that task right now with a level of coordination and deliberateness that is reflective of the fact that there's an upcoming election that will relate to the White House, but also every single seat in Congress, in the House, a third of the Senate, and 11 states will elect governors. So this is very important, because Canada, when we are looking to protect and advance our interests, yes, we work with the administration, but sometimes, and whether that's a Democratic or a Republican White House, the administration's policies aren't necessarily, in Canada's best interests, or they're being implemented in a way that will have an effect on us that we don't want to see happen. And what do we do then? We go to governors, we go to senators, we go to members of Congress, and we say, hey, this policy, if it's implemented in this particular way, it's going to affect the Canada-U.S. supply chain. It's going to affect some co-investment. It's going to affect some business that we're doing in your state. And that will be a challenge for you, because it could affect jobs and prosperity in your state. So what we're doing now is really making sure that we go everywhere in the country. I mean, we have been crisscrossing this country, myself, ministers, members of parliament, premiers, obviously our entire diplomatic network, to sort of raise the baseline understanding of the facts around how much Canada contributes to the resilience, prosperity, and security of not generally the United States, but specific communities, specific states, specific regions of the country, and those that we don't think about as much. That will absolutely be important for us going forward, because we have now, a number of folks who really understand how much we matter to them. And I'm going to give you a quick anecdote here. Mm-hmm. After we were in Pennsylvania with the Prime Minister, I went to Texas and we met the governor. And we went into that meeting with some provinces, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec. We went into that meeting with 5 companies from across the country, 5 of the 800 companies that are invested in Texas. But those 5 companies alone represented $120 billion worth of investment in Texas. So we met the governor, we had a good long discussion, we talked about all the ways in which Canada and Texas are working together. The F-35s that Canada bought, the 88 F-35s that we bought, they're being built in Texas, right? So we talked about all of these things. And as the governor was summing up the meeting at the end, he said, well, it is clear that the Canada-Texas relationship is essential to Texas's future. And let's do more and more together. The governor of Texas is a very staunch Republican and a very strong supporter and ally of former President Trump. But he is also a very strong supporter and ally of Canada and the Canada-Texas relationship. That's an important relationship to have.
Well, I will leave it there. And of course, we'll talk again as the process continues in the United States, as more issues come up. But as always, Ambassador Hillman, I appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Good to talk to you. Thanks.